February 25th, 2022. Gulf of Pariah, Trinidad and Tobago. The water was calm that morning. Out on the Gulf of Pariah, 5 commercial divers descended beneath the surface toward a submerged oil pipeline. It was routine work, technical but familiar, the kind of job they had done before. Inside the pipe, an inflatable plug had been installed earlier to block the flow. The line had been drained. The task now was simple: remove the plug and clear the system. Nothing about it suggested danger. But inside that pipeline, something had already gone wrong. A pressure imbalance had formed, silent, invisible, and deadly. In diving, it's known as delta P. When released, it doesn't push, it pulls. The moment the plug was removed, the pipeline came alive. In an instant, all 5 divers were dragged inside. No warning, no time to react. Just a violent suction that swallowed them into darkness. Inside the pipe, there was no light. Visibility dropped to nothing. The walls closed in around them as they were forced through the narrow interior, disoriented, separated, and unable to communicate. One of them, Christopher Boudrum, survived. Somehow, he managed to stop himself inside the pipe. In total darkness, he began to feel his way forward, crawling through the submerged tunnel for nearly 3 hours. No visibility, no clear direction, just instinct and the need to get out. Eventually, he found an opening. He emerged alive. The others didn't, at least, not immediately. When rescue teams assessed the situation, they realized something unexpected. The 4 remaining divers had survived the initial pull. Deep inside the pipeline, there were small pockets of trapped air, enough to keep them alive, and one of them had a camera. When it was later recovered, investigators didn't find dramatic footage or chaos. They found audio, voices, the men speaking to each other in the dark, trying to understand where they were, trying to stay calm. At times, praying, waiting. Above them, rescue teams faced a problem with no easy solution. The same pressure conditions that pulled the divers inside made any immediate attempt to reach them extremely dangerous. Entering the pipeline could trigger another surge, pulling in more divers. So they waited. Hours passed, then longer. Inside the pipe, the air was limited. Time was running out. By the time recovery teams were finally able to enter safely, it was too late. All 4 men were found inside. The camera had survived, and with it, the only record of what those final hours sounded like. No panic, no shouting, just voices, steady in the dark, holding on to composure in a place where there was nowhere left to go. And when the recording ends, there's no clear moment where hope disappears, only silence. Because unlike most accidents, this one didn't just leave behind evidence, it left behind a voice. And in the next case, the camera doesn't just record what happened in the dark, it shows it. Yuri Lipsky, April 2000, Blue Hole, Dahab, Egypt. The blue hole looks calm from the surface, a perfect circle of deep blue water cut into the coastline of the Red Sea. Clear, still, inviting. But beneath that surface, it drops almost straight down, over 100 meters into darkness. Divers from around the world come here for one reason: the Arch, a submerged tunnel about 55 meters below the surface, connecting the hole to the open sea. It's beautiful, and it's killed dozens of people. On a day in April 2000, a 22-year-old diving instructor named Yuri Lipsky entered the water carrying a camera. He was experienced, confident, and he went far deeper than he should have. The footage begins during the descent. At first, everything appears normal: controlled breathing, smooth movement, the slow, steady drop into blue. But depth changes things. At extreme depths, the human body doesn't behave the same way. Nitrogen narcosis begins to take hold, affecting judgment, awareness, even perception itself. And somewhere past safe limits, something shifts. The descent stops looking controlled. It accelerates. The camera tilts. Movements become erratic. The blue around him darkens into something heavier, something that feels less like water and more like pressure. By the time he reaches the seabed, He's far beyond recreational limits, over 100 meters down. There is no natural light here, only a dim, cold blue fading into black. He tries to correct himself. The footage shows him attempting to inflate his buoyancy device. His hands move quickly, urgently, but not effectively. His breathing becomes unstable. He kicks upward. Nothing happens. At that depth, the body is heavy. Every movement is slower. Every mistake costs more. Then, something even more dangerous happens. He removes his regulator. For a moment, the one thing keeping him alive is no longer in his mouth. He tries to recover, to ascend, to fix what's happening. But the camera keeps recording what he can't fully understand anymore. Confusion, disorientation, a struggle that doesn't follow a clear pattern. Because at that depth, the mind itself is no longer reliable. The final moments aren't sudden. They stretch. He is still moving, still trying, still reacting. But nothing is working. And eventually, the movement slows. The camera settles, and the descent, finally, stops. The next day, another diver descended into the blue hole. He found the body and the camera. When the footage was later recovered, it became one of the only real recordings of a fatal deep dive from the diver's own perspective. Not reconstructed, not imagined, seen. What makes it truly unsettling isn't just what happens. It's how slowly it happens. What happened to Yuri Lipsky didn't unfold in an instant. It crept forward second by second, each moment capturing the quiet loss of control. But the next case is different. There are no final moments to follow. No gradual descent to witness. Only a single instant, where everything ends at once. Titan submersible. June 18th, 2023. North Atlantic Ocean. Nearly 4 kilometers beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, there is no light. No sound. Only pressure. At that depth, around 3,800 meters, the ocean exerts a force so extreme that the human body cannot survive even a fraction of a second without protection. Every square inch is under crushing weight, and yet, people still go there. In June 2023, a submersible known as Titan began its descent toward one of the most famous wrecks in history, the Titanic. Operated by OceanGate, the vessel carried 5 people inside a sealed pressure hull. Their goal was simple: reach the wreck, document it, and return. The descent took time, slow, controlled, methodical. Above them, a support ship tracked their position. Communication was active. Systems were functioning. And then, contact was lost. No distress signal, no warning, just silence. At first, it wasn't clear what had happened. The submersible had lost communication before or during previous dives. There were procedures, timelines, possibilities. But as hours passed, uncertainty turned into concern, then into a search. An international operation began across the North Atlantic. Ships, aircraft, and deep-sea equipment were deployed to locate Titan, somewhere in a vast, dark expanse nearly impossible to navigate. For days, there was hope. Then, a discovery. Debris. Scattered across the ocean floor near the Titanic wreck. Fragments of the submersible's hull. Components that should never have been separated. Investigators would later determine what happened. A catastrophic implosion. At that depth, the pressure doesn't break things slowly. It doesn't bend or crack in a way the human eye can follow. It collapses everything instantly. In less than a fraction of a second, the vessel was crushed inward. There was no time to react, no time to understand, no time to record a final moment. And yet, something did survive. Among the debris field, recovery teams found equipment, fragments, and an underwater camera housing. The exterior had endured conditions that destroyed the submersible itself. And inside, the memory remained intact. Data was recovered, analyzed, studied as part of the investigation into what led to the implosion. Design decisions, materials, warnings that had been raised before the dive ever began. But whatever the camera captured, it did not capture the moment of destruction. Because at that depth, failure is not an event, it's an instant. There is no unfolding, no visible struggle, no final frame. Just a transition from existence to absence. And what's left behind isn't a recording of what happened, but evidence that something did. Because unlike the previous case, where we could watch time slipping away, here, time itself disappears. And in the next story, the danger isn't in the depth, it's in how easily someone can choose to go just a little too far. Foster Falls. Date unspecified. Foster Falls. State Park, Tennessee. From above, it doesn't look dangerous. A waterfall drops cleanly into a wide, still pool. The surface reflects the cliffs, the trees, the sky. People swim here. Hike here. Stand at the edge and look down into the water without thinking twice. But beneath that surface, the pool changes. The depth isn't uniform. The bottom is uneven, scattered with rock formations and sudden drops. The water grows darker the deeper you go, and visibility fades quickly. Even in daylight, it doesn't take long before shapes disappear. At some point, a diver entered that water. They were equipped with a camera, a GoPro, small, waterproof, designed to capture moments exactly like this. Exploration, movement, the quiet perspective of being underwater. The footage begins simply. Swimming, controlled movement through the water, light filtering from above, the faint outline of the surface still visible. At first, everything is normal, but as the diver moves deeper, the environment shifts. The light weakens, the water darkens, the surroundings become harder to read. There are no clear reference points, no horizon, just depth, and the sense of moving through something that doesn't fully reveal itself. Then, something changes. It's subtle. Movement becomes less controlled. The camera angle shifts unpredictably. The smooth rhythm of swimming breaks. The diver is no longer just exploring. They're reacting, trying to stabilize, trying to correct something that's gone wrong. In water like this, it doesn't take much. A current, disorientation, a moment of panic. The footage reflects it, not through anything dramatic, but through small details. Sudden movements, loss of direction, the camera tilting as the diver struggles to regain control. And then, it stops, abruptly. No resolution, no clear end, just a recording that cuts off in the middle of movement. Later, divers exploring the pool found the camera resting at the bottom. Despite being submerged, the memory card still worked, and what it showed helped reconstruct what likely happened in those final moments. There was no extreme depth, no catastrophic pressure, no complex equipment failure, just an environment that became dangerous faster than it appeared. Because sometimes, it isn't the ocean that creates the risk. It's the assumption that something is safe. The footage doesn't show exactly when the situation became irreversible, only that it did, and that it happened quietly. Because unlike the deep sea, where danger builds with depth, here it was already present from the start, hidden in plain sight. And in the next case, the evidence isn't a video, it's a single image that raised more questions than it answered. Tina Watson. October 2003, SS Yongala wreck, Queensland, Australia. The SS Yongala rests beneath the surface of the Coral Sea. A shipwreck turned artificial reef, covered in coral and surrounded by constant movement. Fish circle the structure in dense formations. Large marine life passes through the area without hesitation. It's considered one of the most remarkable dive sites in the world, and one of the most demanding. Currents shift unpredictably. Depth varies. Visibility can change without warning. Divers who enter the site are expected to be experienced, to understand the environment before descending into it. In October 2003, Tina Watson entered the water with her husband, Gabe Watson. It was supposed to be a routine dive, controlled, planned, safe. At some point during the descent, something went wrong. Tina became unresponsive. She sank, not quickly, not violently, but steadily, descending to the ocean floor near the wreck. Other divers in the area didn't immediately understand what had happened. There was no obvious signal, No clear moment where the situation became an emergency. By the time she was found, she was lying motionless on the seabed, surrounded by marine life. Still. One diver took a photograph. The image would later become one of the most widely known pieces of evidence in the case. It showed Tina Watson on the ocean floor, her body positioned near the wreck, the environment around her continuing as if nothing had changed. Calm, uninterrupted, almost indifferent. What followed was not just an investigation into a diving accident, but into the actions of the person who had been closest to her in those final moments. Her husband. Questions began to form around what he did and what he didn't do during the dive. Why she had descended, why she hadn't been brought back up, why the response hadn't matched the urgency of the situation. Over time, the case moved beyond uncertainty. Gabe Watson was charged, and eventually he pleaded guilty to manslaughter in Australia. But even with legal conclusions, the case never fully settled. Because unlike the previous stories, where cameras recorded motion, voices, movement, final attempts, here, everything is reduced to a single frame. One moment, frozen. No beginning, no visible cause, just the aftermath. And the unsettling reality that whatever happened just before the image was taken. Because a photograph doesn't show time. It removes it. And in the next story, the decision that leads to the final moment isn't captured at all. Only the reason behind it remains. Zhang Xiaohan, date unspecified, location unspecified. It didn't start as a dangerous dive. There was no extreme depth planned, no technical objective, no risk that couldn't be managed. At first, it was just a mistake, a camera lost somewhere below. It slipped out of reach, disappearing into deeper water. Not far enough to vanish completely, but far enough to require a decision. Go after it, or leave it behind. Zhang Xiaohan chose to go down. At that moment, the situation still felt controlled. Recovering equipment isn't unusual in diving. It happens, and often it works. But depth has a way of changing simple decisions. The further she descended, the more the environment shifted. Light began to fade. The water grew heavier. Pressure increased, not in a way that can be seen, but in a way the body begins to feel. Each meter added complexity. Each second reduced margin for error. This wasn't a planned deep dive. There was no structured gas management for extended depth, no staged ascent, no preparation for what happens when a short descent becomes longer than expected. But by the time that becomes clear, you're already deeper than you meant to be. Somewhere during the descent, control started to slip. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no clear line where a safe dive becomes a fatal one. Just small changes. Breathing becomes faster. Movement becomes less efficient. Judgment becomes slightly delayed. And in diving, slightly is enough. Without proper control, ascending becomes harder than descending. The body is affected. The environment resists correction. And the distance back to the surface grows longer than it first appeared. Search teams later recovered her body at depth. The camera, the reason for the dive, was also found. What began as a simple retrieval had turned into something else entirely. A decision that took only seconds, but led somewhere it couldn't be undone. Because unlike the previous case, where we were left with a single image, here there is no final frame at all. No recording, no captured moment. Just the knowledge of why she went down, and the understanding that sometimes that's all that's left. And in the next story, even without a camera, the water still holds the answer. Keely Rodney, August 2022, Prosser Creek Reservoir, California. The search began with a location, a gathering near water, a last confirmed sighting, a timeline that, at first, seemed narrow enough to follow. Then it widened. Hours passed without contact, then a full day, then more. 16-year-old Keely Rodney was missing. At first, the assumption was simple. She had left the area, maybe driven somewhere else. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe there was an explanation that just hadn't surfaced yet. But as time moved forward, that explanation didn't come. Instead, the search expanded. Law enforcement canvassed the area. Volunteers joined in. Helicopters scanned from above. Drones traced the terrain. Roads were checked. Paths were retraced. Interviews were conducted with people who had been there that night. Everything pointed back to the same place, near the reservoir. And yet, nothing was found. The water itself became a focus early on. Divers entered Prosser Creek Reservoir, searching sections of the lake where a vehicle might have entered unnoticed. But fresh water like this presents its own challenges. Visibility is limited. Light doesn't travel far. Objects don't reflect the way they do in clear ocean water. And if something settles at the wrong angle, it can disappear completely, even when you're close to it. Initial dives didn't reveal anything. From the surface, the lake remained unchanged. No debris, no visible disturbance, no indication that anything had broken through and gone under. It was as if whatever had happened had left no trace at all. Days turned into weeks. Search areas expanded beyond the immediate shoreline. Attention shifted outward, following possibilities that led further away from the water. But one detail kept pulling the investigation back: the last known location. Eventually, a different approach was brought in. Volunteer search teams equipped with sonar began scanning the reservoir floor, not relying on visibility, but on shape, on contrast, on anything that didn't belong. That's when something appeared. Not clearly, not immediately recognizable. Just a form, resting beneath the surface, out of alignment with the natural environment. A vehicle, positioned about 55 feet down. When divers descended to confirm, they found it overturned, submerged, intact, and almost completely hidden from view unless approached from the right angle. Inside the vehicle was Keely Rodney. The discovery didn't come with a recording. No camera captured the moment the car entered the water. No footage showed what happened in those final seconds. But the environment told a story. The position of the vehicle, the way it had settled, the lack of visible disturbance from above. All of it pointed toward a single conclusion: that the car had entered the reservoir and disappeared in a way that left almost no immediate evidence behind. And for weeks, it remained there. Not far from where the search had started. Close enough to be within reach, but hidden just well enough to be missed. Personal belongings recovered from inside the vehicle added more context. Not answers in the form of words, but details that helped investigators reconstruct the sequence of events. A timeline, built not from observation, but from what was left behind. Because in this case, the water didn't just conceal what happened, it preserved it. Undisturbed, silent, waiting beneath the surface while the search continued above it. And what makes it unsettling isn't just the discovery, but how close it was the entire time. Because unlike the previous cases, where something was recorded, recovered, or witnessed, here everything was already in place. It just wasn't seen. And in the next story, even when divers know exactly where to look, they still don't find what's missing. Ben McDaniel. August 18th, 2010. Vortex Spring, Florida. The entrance to the cave is visible. Clear water, controlled access, a known location. From the outside, it doesn't feel unknown. But beyond that entrance, the environment changes completely. The cave system beneath Vortex Spring is tight, complex, and unforgiving. Passages narrow without warning. Visibility can vanish with a single misplaced movement. Sediment rises, and once it does, direction disappears with it. Divers who enter these systems rely on preparation, experience, and strict limits. Because in a cave, there is no direct path to the surface. On August 18th, 2010, Ben McDaniel entered the water. He had been to the site before, familiar enough with it to know where the main passages were and where they began to narrow. There was one section in particular, a restriction, a tight passage that most divers avoided entirely. Not because it was impossible, but because it allowed very little room for error. To pass through it meant committing to what came next, and coming back through the same space. Ben McDaniel went through that restriction. He was seen entering the water. He was not seen coming back out. When he failed to surface, a search began. Divers entered the cave system, following the known routes, checking the areas beyond the restriction. The environment made everything slower, careful, methodical. Inside, they found something: his tanks, placed beyond the narrow passage, deeper inside the cave. It confirmed one thing immediately: he had made it through. But beyond that point, the cave continues. Branches, tight corridors, areas not fully mapped, spaces where visibility can drop to zero instantly, where a wrong turn doesn't just disorient, it traps. Search teams continued, dive after dive, carefully navigating sections where even experienced cave divers proceed with caution. But they didn't find him. No body, no clear evidence of where he went after passing the restriction, only absence. Over time, multiple theories emerged: that he became trapped in an unexplored section, that he lost visibility and couldn't relocate the exit, that something happened deeper inside the system, beyond the areas divers were able or willing to search. But none of them could be confirmed, because the cave didn't give anything back. No camera, no recording, no final trace beyond the point where he was last known to be. Just the tanks, and the knowledge that he went further in,